Model railroading is a hobby enjoyed by thousands, perhaps millions of people worldwide. You could even argue it's the world's greatest hobby. Every year, people aren't afraid to fork out thousands of dollars in order to replicate railroad operations on a miniature scale, which gives model train companies a lot of money. The business has been around for over a century and isn't likely to stop anytime soon. And yet, at one point in time, the industry as we knew it was almost in jeopardy. This is that story.
For many entrepreneurs, their hobby is their business. For Mike Wolf, his business is a hobby, model trains. And by listening to himself and other train buffs, Wolf has built up a major player in the industry.
The Union Pacific Railroad is a name that any rail fan will recognize. Since their very beginnings, they've always strived to put themselves out there as the best. Throughout the 80s and 90s, they acquired railroad after railroad until they were several times their original size. Their many purchased railroads became known as fallen flags and could have included even more than what they actually got. Meanwhile, the model train market was flourishing, with Lionel nearing its 100th anniversary and the fairly new competitor MTH Electric Trains receiving praises from model railroaders nationwide. The 21st century was an age filled with promise for railroad companies, whether full-scale or O-scale. However, the 2000s would have more obstacles than once thought.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices. Secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror.
After the tragedy that was September 11th, even the railroads gave their condolences. MTH produced a special boxcar in honor of American heroes, and Union Pacific had the idea to paint American flags on the side of their locomotives, something that they continue to do today. Along with the newly established flag logo, Union Pacific underwent some other minor rebranding, mostly with their slogan that they still use today, Building America. And with these changes, the company would become more protective of their image in the near future. May 27, 2004 was a day which changed the model train industry. On that day, Union Pacific filed a lawsuit against Lionel and Athearn. According to them, the two companies had mass-produced items with the Union Pacific trademarks along with the branding of fallen flags they owned without prior licensing, therefore breaking copyright law. Neither Lionel nor Athearn commented much on it, and Athearn jumped out of the line of fire and quickly purchased licensing. However, Lionel wasn't quite finished on the other hand, and neither was Union Pacific. While still dealing with Lionel, they also filed a lawsuit against MTH in December 2005. As social media was only just picking up, model railroaders gave their opinions of the matter on forum posts and even in the news. The case was made between Union Pacific and MTH in the Omaha, Nebraska Federal Court, a few blocks from the UP headquarters. Union Pacific once again made their opinion very clear, but there was one thing that didn't add up. Why was Union Pacific mad about the branding, despite it having happened for decades prior without much issue? On top of that, no other railroads were mad about their trademarks being used. BNSF was only about 10 years old at the time, was about the same size as Union Pacific, they were going through a rebrand of their own, and they didn't mind mass production of their trains. Not even Amtrak or Conrail were mad about the branding situation, and they were owned by the US government. Sure, copyright is a serious problem even today, but if these railroads didn't care too much about it, then why should Union Pacific? And so, that was that. Thanks to MTH and Lionel, model railroad companies were able to breathe easy once again, having dodged a huge bullet. During 2006 and 2007, Union Pacific again allowed companies to continue making their products, no strings attached. Life carried on, and the whole fiasco simply went down as another little obscure piece of railroading lore. 14 years later, while MTH has produced its final model trains and closed its doors, Lionel, Athearn, and the rest are still doing fairly well. Nowadays, model trains coming in from Asia are probably being transported by Union Pacific freight trains. When all was said and done, at the end of the day, all of it just became good business.
We're a great big rolling railroad, one that everybody knows. We were born of gold and silver spikes 100 years ago. We're a million miles of history, as shining in the sun. We're the Union Pacific, and our story's just begun. From the Great Plains of Nebraska to the